Hi, this is Les and Amy from the RevGenetics podcast. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube and now on Spotify, where we do a deep dive on supplements and longevity studies.
Yeah, and today we're looking at, well, something straight out of a sci-fi movie. We're talking about how certain really aggressive brain cancer cells can actually, change their physical shape just to survive getting hit with chemotherapy.
Right, it's just wild. So I want you, the listener, to just imagine you are playing a notoriously difficult video game. You know, things are getting overwhelming. The boss fight is just way too intense. So you do what anyone would do to catch their breath. You hit the pause button.
Yeah, a totally tactical retreat. It gives you a second to just, assess the battlefield.
Exactly. But imagine if, while the game is paused, the enemy doesn't actually stop. Instead, right there on the frozen screen, it starts secretly changing shape. Like it physically builds thicker armor, it shifts its weapons around, preparing for this even more devastating attack the absolute second you unpause the game.
I mean, that is just a deeply unfair mechanic for a video game.
It really is. But unfortunately, it turns out that might be exactly what some of the deadliest cancer cells are doing inside the human body when we hit them with chemotherapy. So that's our mission for this deep dive. We want to explore this highly dynamic and honestly kind of terrifying zombie state that these cancer cells enter after they get hit with chemo.
Yeah, it's a brilliant piece of science. The researchers were looking at a very fast-moving type of brain cancer, and they specifically wanted to see how it reacts to the standard everyday chemotherapy that doctors use to fight it.
Right, because what this study reveals is that these paused cells are not just sitting there as dead weight, they are shape-shifting, incredibly dynamic survivors.
Oh, absolutely. They totally challenged the traditional view of what we thought chemo actually did to a tumor.
Okay, so before we get to the shape-shifting itself, we really need to understand the zombie state. For someone who, maybe hasn't looked through a microscope since high school biology, what physically is a zombie cell?
So, simply put, a zombie cell is a cell that is stuck in a permanent pause. Normally, a biological cell divides, it grows, and it divides again. It's a natural cycle. But when a cell undergoes severe catastrophic stress, like, say, massive damage from a chemotherapy drug, it pulls the emergency brake. It permanently stops dividing.
Right, hence the zombie nickname. It's not reproducing anymore, but it isn't actually dead either. It's just sort of stuck.
Precisely. It enters this weird twilight biological state. But here is the critical part that researchers are really zeroing in on. A zombie cell doesn't just sit there quietly doing nothing. It actually begins spitting out this highly toxic mix of pollution into the area around it.
Wow, so it's actively poisoning its own environment.
Yeah, it's pumping out all these signals that literally inflame and degrade the surrounding tissue. In a normal, healthy body, this is actually a distress signal. It tells the immune system, hey, come clean up this damage. But in a brain tumor, that toxic pollution can inadvertently fuel the cancer. It can actually help neighboring surviving cancer cells grow even more aggressively.
That's basically a ticking time bomb. So if hitting the tumor with chemotherapy stops the immediate growth, but leaves behind this highly toxic population of zombie cells, how did the researchers actually figure out what these zombies were doing?
Well, they set up a really clever experiment to mimic what actually happens in a human patient. They took standard brain cancer cells in a lab and treated them with a clinical dose of chemotherapy for 5 days.
Which is a pretty heavy hit of damage.
Oh, a massive hit.
Yeah.
But then they completely removed the drug and let the cells recover in a normal, healthy environment for 3 weeks. Because, that simulates the real treatment cycles patients get in the clinic. You don't just get continuous nonstop chemo. Your body needs a rest period.
So what actually happens during that rest period in the lab?
Initially, they saw exactly what a textbook would predict. The overall population of cells just stopped expanding. Under the microscope, they started exhibiting all the classic signs of the zombie state. They got physically massive. They flattened out like pancakes.
The classic bloated zombie look.
Right. But then came the twist. After about 12 days, the researchers noticed something really alarming. A new group of much smaller, normal-looking, actively dividing cells started to emerge from that exact same zombie population. The tumor was actively trying to regrow.
Wait, hold on. You just said the zombie state is a permanent pause. But you're also saying normal dividing cells just popped out of this exact same group. Those two things physically can't both be true.
And that contradiction is the million-dollar question right now. It's a total mystery. Because there are a few possibilities here. It could simply be lucky survivor cells that somehow dodged the chemo blast and just woke up later.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense.
But the other possibility, and this is the one that keeps researchers up at night, is that some of these zombie cells, these theoretically permanent zombies, are finding a biological loophole to escape the pause. They are literally unpausing the game themselves.
That is wild.
Yeah, and to figure out how they were doing this, the researchers used these special microscopic tracking cameras to watch thousands of individual cells over time. And they found that these zombie cells weren't all wearing the same uniform. They heavily split into two completely different physical shapes.
Okay, let's unpack these because this shape-shifting is the core discovery here. First, we have what they call the spiky shape. What does that look like?
So the spiky shape shows up early on, right after the chemo. If you look at them, they are highly irregular. They are covered in these spiky, elongated extensions reaching out into their environment. They are totally jammed up with high energy, like a car revving its engine at a red light. But the chemo cut the brake lines.
They sound super agitated.
Very agitated. And then there's the flat shape. These show up much later. These are the absolute behemoths, just massive, highly stable flat cells sitting in a very deep resting state.
You know, when I was reading the visual descriptions of these two shapes, I kept thinking of a werewolf transformation. Stick with me here, because I think it maps perfectly.
Oh, I am completely on board. Walk us through it.
Okay, so a normal cancer cell gets hit by the chemotherapy. That's the full moon. It triggers the change. That early spiky shape, the highly irregular one trapped in that high energy phase, that is the mid-transformation monster. It's chaotic. It's a highly volatile halfway state.
Yes, exactly.
And then the flat shape, the massive resting one, that is the final form. The transformation is complete. The werewolf is just sitting there, massive, stable, heavily armored, and incredibly dangerous.
I love that analogy because it perfectly aligns with what they saw. And the crazy part, they watched this happen live. They watched a normal cell morph into the chaotic, spiky monster and then settle into the massive, flat werewolf. But, and this is the part that shattered our assumptions, the shape-shifting wasn't a one-way street.
Wait, really?
Yeah, they watched some of those massive flat cells morph back into the chaotic spiky cells. The werewolf was literally turning back into the mid-transformation monster just to adapt and survive. It's basically just shape-shifting on the fly.
Man, a quick shout out to RevGenetics for making this show possible. You know, RevGenetics really supports our mission to explore the latest in human health and longevity.
Yeah, and they've had this long-term focus on evidence-based natural compounds for aging research, like resveratrol and NMN.
Which is awesome because supporting cellular health is exactly what we need when dealing with all these crazy biological mechanisms.
Absolutely.
So getting back to these shape-shifting werewolves in the brain, they're shifting back and forth between this spiky shape and this massive flat shape, pumping out toxic pollution, just acting as a time bomb for the tumor to regrow. So how do doctors actually launch a counterattack? Like, how do you kill an enemy while the game is paused?
Well, to figure that out, the researchers had to locate the tumor's fuel source. Like, what is keeping these specific zombies alive during this massive physical transformation? And they found this biological process that basically acts as the cell's internal recycling center.
A recycling center. So like eating its own trash.
Exactly. When a cell is under extreme stress, like the massive damage from chemotherapy, it starts breaking down its own damaged parts to harvest raw energy and survive. It's essentially eating its own furniture just to keep the furnace burning.
Wow. Okay, so if you're a cancer cell, transforming from a high-energy spiky shape into a massive flat shape requires a huge amount of physical remodeling. You have to build a completely new structure.
Right, and it gets the raw materials for that massive renovation by eating its own internal trash.
So if you jam up that recycling plant early, it literally shouldn't have the materials to finish the transformation, right?
And that is exactly what the data showed. The researchers used a specific chemical blocker to shut down the recycling center really early on. It didn't kill the cells outright, but it completely paralyzed their ability to shapeshift. They got physically trapped in that spiky shape. They couldn't progress to the massive, flat werewolf form.
Okay, so trapping them is a huge step. But I mean, the holy grail here isn't just trapping them. We want to assassinate them directly. And this is where a completely new class of medicines enters the picture. The zombie assassins.
Yes, these are fascinating drugs. They are specifically engineered to seek out and destroy zombie cells while leaving healthy, normal cells completely alone.
So the researchers basically unleashed these zombie assassins on the brain cancer cells in the lab.
They did. They tested a bunch of well-known standard assassin drugs.
And did they clear the board?
Surprisingly, they had almost zero effect. The cancer cells just completely shrugged them off.
Wait, why, if the cells are zombies and these drugs kill zombies, why did the assassins fail?
Because of the shape-shifting. This is where it all ties together. Those classic assassin drugs target a very specific type of chemical armor on the outside of the cell. But the researchers found that as these cancer cells shifted forms, especially into the massive flat shape, they literally changed their armor.
Oh, wow. They changed their armor while the game was paused. The drugs bounced off because they were targeting a shield the werewolf wasn't even wearing anymore.
Exactly. So the researchers had to pivot. They tested a completely different type of medicine, a specific new drug that doesn't care about that outer armor at all. Instead, it targets and disrupts the internal communication of the cell itself.
Okay, and did that one work?
Brilliantly. It successfully caused the zombie cells to shrink and die. But the critical nuance here is that it highly preferred killing the spiky cells. It was incredibly effective at taking out that mid-transformation monster.
You know, if you are listening to this right now and wondering why your doctor hasn't mentioned, shape-shifting cells or targeted spiky assassins, it's because this is bleeding-edge science. But the real-world application here is just breathtaking. We are looking at a total shift in how we might treat cancer in the future.
Oh, completely. We're moving entirely away from just giving a massive dose of chemo and hoping it just blindly destroys everything.
Right. It's moving toward this highly choreographed two-step dance. So step 1, you deliver the chemotherapy. You know it won't cure the tumor entirely, but you use it intentionally to force the surviving cancer cells to hit the brakes. You deliberately push them into the zombie state.
And then step 2, you figure out what physical shape the zombies took. Like, are they trapped in the spiky shape? Or have they settled into the massive flat shape?
Because if you just blindly throw a standard zombie assassin drug at them, it will bounce right off their shifted armor. You have to know the shape. If they are in the spiky shape, you hit them with that new communication-blocking drug. You clear the board before they ever have a chance to unpause the game.
It is precision medicine taken to an entirely new level. We're not just looking at their genetics anymore. We're hunting their physical shapes in real time.
To summarize this whole crazy journey for you guys, chemotherapy forces cancer cells into a paused zombie state. But these zombies are highly dynamic. They're shape-shifting back and forth between a spiky state and a massive flat state, changing their armor and their recycling habits as they go. To truly beat the disease, we need tailored assassin drugs to clear out these specific shapes before their toxic pollution helps the tumor regrow.
It's just a profound masterclass in how cancer survives. But before we wrap up, I really want to leave you with one final thought. We've been talking entirely about cancer today. But that zombie state, it's actually the primary biological driver of normal human aging. As you get older, zombie cells naturally build up in your body, in your heart, your skin, your joints.
They're like the biological rust in the human machine.
Exactly. And scientists globally are trying to develop these assassin drugs to clear out those normal aging zombie cells to keep us healthier for longer. But this study raises a huge question. If cancer zombie cells can dynamically shapeshift back and forth to evade death and change their armor, could these zombie cells causing our normal bodily aging be doing the exact same shape-shifting routine?
Oh my gosh, are the zombie cells in an aging heart physically shape-shifting to hide from our own immune systems?
It's entirely possible. We might need the exact same shape-identifying dance to cure aging as we do to cure cancer.
We have to know what form the werewolf is in before we can cure the bite. That is terrifying, but absolutely incredible. And that wraps up today's episode. We hope today's podcast on public science gave you something useful to take away.
Thank you for listening to the RevGenetics podcast.
RevGenetics.com for the best longevity supplements on Earth.